On October 29, 1989, a Boeing 747-200 was making its way from Sydney to Christchurch in New Zealand. The plane had a short cool-down period after takeoff from Sydney, and the pilot expected a smooth ride for the remainder of the trip. That is, until the No. 2 engine exploded. The explosion blew out the side of the aircraft, sending sparks flying, and the crew knew they needed to land immediately. This is the story of Qantas Flight 32. It's me, and this is 1 minute. It all started at 1:36 p.m. local time, when the pilots of Qantas Flight 32 took off from Sydney Airport bound for Christchurch. The flight was normal, with nothing out of the ordinary happening. The jet streaked across the sky, leaving behind a vapor trail that marked its path like graffiti. At 1:43 p.m., the pilots were cleared to descend from 29,000 feet to 24,000 feet. As the plane began its descent, the pilots noticed that the EGT, or exhaust gas temperature, of the NO to engine, the right-hand engine from the pilot's point of view, was rising rapidly. The EGT is the temperature of the gas that flows out of the back of an engine. So if the EGT rises rapidly, it means that something is wrong with the engine and it's overheating. The first officer said, "Oh no, we've lost No. 2, and the captain responded by pushing the thrust levers to idle. Idle is basically the lowest power setting for the engines. But before the captain could react, there was a massive explosion. The four-engine jet had lost an engine and part of its fuselage. The airplane rocked violently as metal and debris rained down onto the farmlands below. Some of the wreckage fell on a farm owned by Brian and Marilyn Bishop. Brian was working on his tractor while Marilyn was inside the house fixing dinner. They heard the explosion and saw black smoke billowing into the sky. When they looked up, they saw what seemed to be a flare. I said to Brian, "What the hell was that?" Marilyn recalled. Then we looked up and we could see the smoke and the vapor trail left from the aircraft. Flames shot out of the side of the damaged plane, and fuel leaked out, forming a ball of fire on the ground. But miraculously, the plane was still flying. In the cockpit, the pilots were struggling to regain control of the stricken jet. The captain put the plane into a left-hand bank to counteract the now-defunct engine on the right. "We have a full mayday," the captain radioed to air traffic control. The pilots knew they needed to get the plane on the ground as soon as possible. The captain asked for a straight-in approach to runway 34 at Christchurch Airport. In aviation, a straight-in approach means that the pilot flies directly over the runway for their final approach. Air traffic controller Don Cameron cleared the plane to descend down to 10,000 feet. Then something odd happened. The 747 began descending too quickly. The plane went from 24,000 feet to 10,000 feet in just 9 minutes. This wasn't exactly an emergency landing. The plane and its contents were literally raining out of the sky. As the plane sped toward Christchurch, passengers began to panic. Some people screamed as they looked around the cabin and saw their oxygen masks dangling above them. Others prayed silently, hoping for a miracle. A flight attendant named Debbie Malthouse stood in the aisle trying to calm the passengers down. "I can't remember much after that," she said later. "I was trying to reassure people, telling them to put their masks on and that everything would be all right. All I kept thinking was that I had to get myself together because if I didn't, the passengers would panic." Meanwhile, the pilots were doing their best to keep the plane under control. The captain set the autopilot to 10,000 feet, and he and the first officer wrestled with the controls. "You really don't want to lose the altitude," the captain said later. "If you lose the altitude, you stand a very good chance of not surviving. You're talking about high-speed impact with the ground." At 2:20 p.m., the plane landed safely at Christchurch. As it taxied to the gate, cheers erupted and people began to clap. Passengers hugged each other and some even broke down in tears. The safe landing was a testament to the skill of the pilots and the strength of the plane. Out of the 239 people on board, only one woman suffered serious injuries. She had a slight head injury and a broken collarbone, but she made a full recovery. For the most part, the passengers were incredibly lucky. After the plane came to a stop, firefighters rushed to the scene. They checked the passengers and crew to make sure everyone was okay. Then they began to inspect the plane. The damage was extensive. The entire side of the fuselage was destroyed, and the engine that had exploded was completely ripped from the plane. It was found in a paddock near where the plane had taken off from Sydney. But how did such a large engine explode? When the engine failed, it shot apart like a firework. Investigators found fragments of the engine in a wide area around the point of the explosion. The initial investigation revealed that the engine had been working perfectly fine up until the moment it exploded. There were no warning signs or malfunctions. The real question was, why did the engine explode? To answer that question, investigators turned to a piece of the engine that had been salvaged from the paddock. It was a piece of the intermediate pressure turbine. This is one of the parts of the engine that converts the kinetic energy of the airflow into mechanical energy. When the engine exploded, the turbine was spinning at 14,000 revolutions per minute. It continued to spin after the explosion, which tore the engine apart. But here's the thing, the turbine should have stopped spinning when the engine was shut down. In fact, it should have slowed down very quickly due to a device called a spill valve. The spill valve is designed to let air into the engine, which slows the turbine down. But the spill valve didn't open when the engine was shut down. Why didn't it open? That's a great question. As it turns out, the spill valve was jammed shut due to corrosion. This allowed the turbine to continue to spin, and when it hit the casing, it exploded. The explosion tore the engine apart and sent shrapnel flying. The shrapnel damaged the plane's hydraulic systems, which controlled the ailerons, elevators, and rudder. It also damaged the indicators in the cockpit. These failures are what caused the plane to dive. If the pilots had pushed the thrust levers forward to increase power, they wouldn't have been able to recover from the dive. The explosion also damaged the plane's electrical system. This caused the cargo door and several windows to shatter. It also knocked out the engine-driven generator, which provided power to the hydraulic pumps. These hydraulic pumps are what kept the plane stable. Without them, the plane would have been impossible to control. But, despite all these problems, the pilots managed to land the plane safely. Their quick reactions saved the lives of everyone on board. When the plane landed, it was leaking fuel everywhere. The firefighters were worried that the ball of fire that they saw might ignite, but it never did. The pilots had done a good job of dumping fuel during the flight. Also, none of the fuel tanks had ruptured, so there was no danger of a massive fireball. Now, after the plane was repaired, it returned to service. And here's the kicker. The same thing happened to the same plane 2 years later. On November 1991, a Qantas 747-200 was flying from Melbourne to Christchurch. It experienced the same type of engine failure, and it made an emergency landing at a small airstrip in New Zealand. Turns out the same engine that exploded in 1989 had a small crack in it. The crack developed over time, and it eventually caused the engine to fail. Luckily, the plane was able to make an emergency landing and nobody was hurt. So what's the takeaway from all this? Well, sometimes a small crack can have big consequences. If the engineers hadn't found the crack and repaired it, the plane might have exploded again. Also, airplanes are incredibly complex machines, and sometimes even a small malfunction can have catastrophic consequences. But in the case of Qantas Flight 32, the pilots and crew were able to overcome the malfunction and land the plane safely. That's pretty remarkable. Now, who wants to watch another aviation video? Click here to watch this video. If you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a member. Your support helps me make more videos like this one. Thanks for watching. See you next time.